And I'm curious if you could come to the moment and talk a little bit about the moment when Asher, who grew the long payas, which represents something. There's something external and tangible and real about that. About the moment when you decided to cut them, to no longer have, you have payas obviously, but not langa Chassidic payas. The moment that you decided to cut them, how old were you? Why did you decide at that point? And how did your father, Rebbe, how did you react to that?
Okay. So first, I kind of want to respond to that what you had said before. Your experience of it on the other side, and it will sort of segue into the payas question. I look back sometimes and I wonder, was I assertive enough or early enough? And what I think about it, the way I think about it now is that I was trying to be very gentle because I had this sense that this was very meaningful and this was very important. And I also had this sense that I can't really understand how important this is to my father because I'm one generation removed from that. I didn't grow up hearing my parents screaming in their sleep, right? And Dad, remember we were talking about this the other day about how it just found out, like scientifically speaking, how a woman carries all the eggs she'll ever produce from the time she's born, right? And in a way, children of Holocaust survivors actually were in the camps, right? And I can't understand what that can do to a person. I can't understand how that alters our psyche and our vision for ourselves and for the future and any entanglements and transgenerational trauma, etc. So it's something that I intuited, like this is something you have to handle carefully because this is actually something you can't understand, never will be able to understand. So I tried to be as gentle, and sometimes maybe that was a disservice to myself, not asserting or communicating clearly about where I stood on things and what I was comfortable with. But yeah, that's just a process of growing up and maturing. So the same thing really was with the payas. It wasn't like there was this one moment where I said, okay, I'm going to cut them off. It wasn't like that. It was kind of a very gradual process. And I think that really speaks to the core of what the experience is like, what my experience is like, and probably what the experience is like for other people growing up in a similar type of dynamic with a parent who is somewhat, we'll call it larger than life or extremely, charismatic dynamic or famous for lack of better terms, right? For most people, the process of life is adding on layers. It's growing your payas longer and incrementally, right? It's like discovering things that your parents provide you with a great platform. And from there, you just add your unique, the things you want to add to your life, right? Whether it's perspectives, it's ideologies, it's practice, whatever it is. But for me and for people like me, I'd say the process is absolutely 180 degrees in reverse. It's the process of removing layers, right? You're given these big ideas. You're the child of people who've already figured it out, more or less, right? And so you grow up around all these big ideas that are not yet integrated per se, right? They feel right, they sound right, but they're not necessarily yours. You don't own them. So you might have long payas, but they're not necessarily ones that you grew, right? So the process of maturing and growing for someone in my circumstance is really the opposite. It's the removal of layers, taking off each layer at some point in your life, holding up to the light, looking at it and saying, is this mine? Do I want this? If so, I'll take it back. If not, I'll discard it. Right. So it's a reverse process of growth. It's confusing. And it's not like, I'm not advocating that we need to have special institutions for privileged people like myself. Like, I don't think it's going to be I can't go door to door collecting. Hey, I'm looking to raise money for an institution for privileged sons of, rabbis and CEOs. No one's going to donate to that cause. But it's definitely a very different experience. It's the removal of layers and it's gradual. And to what you're saying, it's like the irony of it is that it actually worked out. And I'm wondering if it worked the other way, what would have happened? Had I gone to a mainstream institution, maybe I'd be stuck in the mainstream and the inner payas never would have grown to where they are today, right? So I think, of course, everything always works out. It's all a process of evolution, but spiritual evolution. But it's just ironic that I think it actually worked out exactly the way it was supposed to.
Before your father responds, I'm just curious, this is the technical question, just so I have like a timeline in my own head.
Sure.
How old were you when you cut off your payas? I'm just curious.
It started in ninth grade when I went to high school.
Oh, it was literally gradual. They got like a little bit shorter.
Yeah. Then behind the ear, then eventually.
Oh, gotcha.
And to this day, every time I take a haircut, I am still conscious of it. It's something that it's still an active process for me until I decide not to, if I decide not to. And it was meaningful to me. It wasn't just like a cavalier kind of, hey, on and off the next day. It was something that I took seriously. And also, again, trying to be sensitive to it and trying to do something gradually. I don't want to shock anyone. I think
come down one morning. Yeah.
I don't want to do that, but I do remember the sound you made when you found my shaver for the first time. that was funny.
What was that sound, Asher, in your memory?
Like what's this? A shaver has never crossed the threshold.
It never crossed the threshold.
Right. And
gotcha.
Honestly, the funny thing is I don't shave today either, but well, I also don't have a long beard.